like there's been, and I've listened to quite a lot of people talking about the sort of the reasons for the growth of this, yeah, sort of very left-wing neo-Marxist ideology, especially amongst universities, then through political parties. You can argue a lot of the sort of more cultural side of it has gone through both parties, and just like most of the elite, however you want to define that. But I've heard a lot of people with very different opinions on why this has been pushed, essentially, or why it's become successful and so widespread, or at least seemingly. And the argument that was most shocking, but also almost most seemed to make the most sense to me, was the one, I think it was made by Matt Walsh, where he says that they are attempting to sever the next generation from their parents ideologically, so that they live in such a different world that they will reject the world of their parents entirely, and that they can then build their own new sort of, like, I don't know, proto-communist downtown Portland kind of state. Do you think that's an insane proposition? Like, what's your?
I don't think it's an insane proposition, but I don't think it's accurate. I think if you want the next generation to separate themselves from their parents' world, you just need to let them grow up, and they're going to do it anyway. I mean, that's what children always do, right? I think they're much. First of all, it's never going to be one argument. I think it's a conflagration of different things. We interviewed a woman called Mary Eberstad, who wrote a book called Primal Screams, How the Sexual Revolution Gave Us Identity Politics. And her argument is that the technological creations of the sexual revolution, which is essentially the pill, allowed modes of behavior that previously would have been impossible, and it separated sex from commitment. And so this has advantaged men, some men, and disadvantaged women, and particularly children, because it's led to the breakdown of the family. And we've seen an explosion in single parenthood. And I always have to say this, because people are, they're unwilling to hear the intention behind what I'm saying. I'm not blaming single parents. Like, my wife and I just had a baby 4 months ago. I cannot imagine raising that child by myself, or my wife, who's a brilliant mum, raising that child by herself. It is hard. So I'm not suggesting that those people aren't doing their best and aren't doing a good job, but the facts are very clear. The children who grow up in a single parent environment do way worse at school. They're far more likely to end up in prison. They're far more likely to end up in drug abuse. They're far more likely to become alcoholics. On almost every measure of social well-being, they score far lower than children who had two parents. On average. So the breakdown of the family leads to a lot of unhappy people, right? And unhappy people are not the sort of people who are likely to want to support the status quo, because they're unhappy. And particularly if you're unhappy in the modern world, you've got the tools to project your unhappiness onto the world much more than you would have done in the past, because there's other people who are unhappy who are all telling you the same thing, which is, it's not your fault. The fact that you're unhappy is not because you haven't worked hard enough. It's not because you haven't tried to improve your life circumstances. It's not because you haven't done enough of personal development or therapy or whatever it is to improve your mindset to succeed. It's not because of the choices that you've made. It's not because the financial decisions you've made are the consequences of your actions and what you haven't learned yet and whatever. No, it's the fault of the system. It's the patriarchy. It's the this, it's the that, it's the whatever. And so you've got a group of people who are looking out into the world, and they are seeking an explanation for why they feel miserable, right? And they are finding other people who have that same eternal feeling. I mean, you talk about Portland and Antifa and whatever. Look at the mugshots. Andy No post mugshots of Antifa members who are getting arrested for rioting, whatever. Look at their faces. Are those the faces of happy people who are living in a stable environment with a family and a couple of kids? No, these are not happy people. And so the sexual revolution is part of that. Then you add on top of that, in this country, the housing crisis, the fact that young people really struggle to pair up and find somewhere to live. And as you know, I talk about this in the book quite a lot. It's really important. If you want people to be grounded, and I've experienced this in the last few months, There's nothing that makes you collide with reality more than having a child. Because whatever bullshit ideas you had in your head about what's true and what's not, oh, men and women, there's no difference. Really?
Yeah.
Right, look at a baby, look at a female baby, look at a male baby. The difference is pretty clear, right? And then and all sorts of other things like that. Whereas if we all live on the internet, on our phones, in a flat share somewhere in the outskirts of London, and we don't actually interact with real things in the real world. We're just on our social devices. Well, on the internet, the idea that there's no difference between men and women makes perfect sense, right? Because equality, man. Well, why wouldn't you want equality? It's only when you're confronted with reality that you suddenly start to realize that this is happening. This is one of the interesting things that's changing in the landscape. We had Louise Perry on the show, and this is very much her argument, that we've come to a position where this endless pursuit of sexual liberation, sexual freedom, and whatever has allowed people to become divorced from the reality of things. And we are now starting to see the costs of those ideological obsessions be borne by the very people who've been forced to imbibe them. And you're going to see, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 39. For our generation, there is a large cohort of women who've come to a point, if they're, say, my age, and they haven't made certain decisions that they would have needed to have made to have the things that they want to have, they're starting to realize, actually, this really wasn't all that it was made out to be.
Yeah, live your best life isn't always the best advice.
Yeah.
I'm 28. I know I look kind of old. It's the ski seasons.
You're Irish, mate. You guys are all like that.
Yeah, well, that's also true. Long, hardened life of being oppressed by the British.
Yes.
I have that discussion frequently with really good friends of mine. I'm like, I don't feel oppressed. And they're like, well, you're Protestant.
Well, see,
so, like, yeah, but just like, I actually, like, I just I mean, you could make the case, right, that because of, I don't know, there were some slights that I had in my childhood because of, growing up in Northern Ireland. It's just like, really? I mean, I don't think so. Like, I got to go to a pretty good school. Like, Northern Ireland's got the best education system in the UK. I'm pretty pleased about that. Got smaller class sizes on average. Went to a grammar school. That was great.
Well, see, there's a difference between being disadvantaged and being oppressed. I have no doubt that your generation would have obviously grown up with stories from your family and your parents of all the difficult things that happened in Ireland, and partly due to British rule, no doubt, right? But the question of whether you were oppressed and whether you're disadvantaged are completely separate. There are many ways in which I've been disadvantaged in my life. There are many ways in which I've been privileged in my life. But it's oppression it takes two to tango. You have to want to describe yourself in that way. I have this argument with a friend of mine who is, believe it or not, even shorter than me. He's like 5'4" or something like that. And he's very much on board with all of this stuff, oppression and people being disadvantaged. And I said to him, well, what about you? You're 5'4". We know, statistically speaking, heightism is a massive thing in society, particularly for men. We know that like 93% of top CEOs in this country are all over 6 foot. We know blah, blah, all sorts of statistics about it. And he went, yeah, but being short made me who I am. I had to deal with this and I had to deal with that. And so at an individual level, people understand that even the difficulties you experience will sometimes be the forces that shape you into being the person who is successful in some way. So oppression requires you to want to be oppressed.
Yeah, and I just don't like that attitude.
Well, exactly.
You start, then you're starting with like, oh, well, my feet are tied together, so I can't run, whilst the knots aren't actually tied. It's a strange position to be in sometimes. I mean, we have some great discussions with them about it, but they've never managed to convince me that I've been oppressed. So thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.